Yeah, I'll tell you when to come in.
Ready when you are, Claudia.
Okay. Everybody take a breath, and we're leaving mundane time. At the midpoint of our Lenten journey, we pause to breathe in the world around us. Every day, the sun rises higher in the eastern sky, reminding us of the constant motion of the earth as it twirls through the mystery of endless space, carrying us like children on its broad shoulders. We fall like a leaf on the river and are carried through a landscape of days and seasons, each of them holy. Some stand like stones on the horizon without inscription because the story they tell is too great for the confines of human words. As we make our way to the Paschal bonfire, the melting snow whispers to us of the earth's own journey through the fire and ice that shaped the mountains and set the rivers in motion. At the heart of Celtic spirituality is the journey, an awareness that even as we seek out stillness, we are ever in motion. Even at rest, we are part of an unseen dance of atoms and molecules to a tune so intricate it can only be described as love. We surrender to our journey through the seasons that carries us now into the lengthening days of springtime. We surrender to the wisdom of the river that knew the way before we were born. We surrender ourselves to the constant motion of the seasons and of our lives, and in that surrender discover that at the heart of this ever-revolving, ever-evolving universe is deep stillness and everlasting love. St. Patrick's Day falls as winter snows give way to the emerging green of spring. We are in between the seasons, a thin place in the year. The ancient Celts believed that it's in those places which lie betwixt and between that we are most likely to catch a fleeting glimpse of the divine. St. Patrick himself might be seen as a thin place where indigenous Celtic spirituality, which rises up from the earth itself, opened to receive his vision of a loving and forgiving presence at the heart of creation. Falsha, welcome to the stories of Patrick's life.
First story, the birth of St. Patrick. Patrick wasn't a Hibernian, nor was he born in the land we now call Ireland. His parents were both Romans, stationed at the furthest outpost of the vast Roman Empire. He was born in a Roman villa in a town that is known today as Banwell, near the craggy western coast of England, just below Wales. An old stone-paved Roman highway still runs through it. The Roman Empire was already showing signs of weakness when Patrick was born. After conquering most of Europe, the empire stopped short at Hadrian's Wall in northern England. The tribes who lived in the north just wouldn't give up. Between the constant skirmishes with the Celts along the wall and the effort to trying to keep the rebellious Britons in check, the Roman generals wisely decided not to risk crossing the sea to face the wild Hibernian chieftains. So the vast Roman Empire, which had swallowed up most of Europe, stopped short of the borders of Ireland. When Patrick was a boy, the Irish sent Viking-like raiding parties to Britain to wreak havoc on the Roman settlements and drive the invaders back to the continent. One night, when Patrick was not yet 16, a party of Irish raiders crossed the channel and sailed up the river to Banwell. In a surprise attack, the raiders took many prisoners, including young Patrick. The raiders sailed north with their plunder and a full shipload of captives to sell into slavery.
Story the second, Patrick enslaved. In a single moment, Patrick lost everyone and everything he'd ever known. Even his clothing was taken, even his name. He spent the next 6 years in slavery. By his own account, he was humiliated, barely clad, and often hungry. For 6 years, he tended his master's herds in the wilds of Northern Ireland. In stark contrast to the life he'd known before, this new way of living was so primitive, it was almost animalistic. His days were spent watching over his master's sheep as they grazed on a mountainside not far from the sea. Living out of doors with neither books nor friends to occupy his mind, his attention turned to the natural world. With no human voice to distract him, long hours were spent listening to the sound of the birds, with no roof over his head to block his vision. He became familiar with the patterns of the stars. Huddled together for warmth, he slept outdoors, rough with the dogs who stayed by his side even through frost and rain. Not yet fluent in the local language and yearning for companionship, he began to speak with God. The pure white moon was the skull cap that covers his head as he learned to pray. As a well-to-do youth in a Roman town, Patrick had little use for religion, but alone on the mountainside, he woke many times every night to check on his flock and pray. By his own account, he was often shivering with cold as he lay there alone with the dogs on frosty nights or soaked to the skin in the spring rains. Perhaps he remembered a traditional prayer or the Psalms which speak of a gentle shepherd, but it's more likely he spoke directly in his own words to the Creator, whose loving presence gradually revealed itself in the light of the sun, the radiance of the moon, and the stability of the rock beneath his feet. Mark?
O hears the fires, Kyrie. O hears the ocean song of praise. Who listens in the sacred grove? Who hears the mountains tell of their creation? Who is the harvest as well as the seed? Hear the name as it's spoken by the wind in the reeds. Who dwells within the night hawk's cry? Whose spirit comes forth from the rock, who arises with the evening star, who travels with the birds at their migration. Who is the shelter as well as the storm? See the name as it's written by the moon on the sea.
One night in a dream, Patrick heard a voice tell him, "Soon you will return to your own country. Look, your ship is ready." He took flight and traveled 200 miles to the harbor where, as promised in the dream, a ship was waiting. It's been said that the ship carried a cargo of headstrong Irish hunting dogs. While waiting for the captain to come and speak with him, Patrick spoke to the excited dogs, and they all quieted down in his presence. But the captain refused this disheveled shepherd passage on his ship. Patrick walked away, praying that the captain would change his mind. As soon as Patrick had left the docks, the dogs set up a powerful howl, and they would not be silenced. The captain, exasperated, sent a sailor to find Patrick and offer him passage if only he could keep the dang dogs quiet. The dogs settled down as soon as they heard his voice, so the captain reluctantly welcomed him aboard ship. And so Patrick found his way to Gaul, which today is known as France. Many of the details have been lost, but we know that Patrick studied for the priesthood and was ordained, probably in Gaul. He was reunited with his family in Britain. In his letters, he speaks of being captured a second time and held for 2 months, but little detail is offered. Then, once again, in a vision of the night, he encountered a man who identified himself as Victoricius. The messenger carried a packet of letters with him. He gave one of these epistles to Patrick. The letter began with the words, "The voice of the Irish." As Patrick read aloud in his dream, he heard the voices of the people of Ireland begging him to return to them, and so he did, but this time as a priest.
Give all my vision, O Lord of my heart. O blessed be not to me, save what thou art. For my best thought by day or night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my life. With all my wisdom and thou my true word, I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Oh, my great Father, my Lord, may I be. Thou in my dwelling, and I one with thee. High King of heaven, when victory is won, may I reach heaven's joy, bright heaven's song. Out of my heart twill never be forlorn. Still be my vision, O ruler of all.
Fluent in the Irish language and the indigenous Celtic religion, Patrick was well prepared to communicate with the people when he returned to Ireland. To this day, the Irish people are proud of the fact that the Irish came to Christ of their own free will, not at the point of a Roman sword. In Celtic Christianity today, we find a lingering reverence for the natural world that is rooted in the indigenous beliefs and rituals of Ireland and Scotland. During his years of prayer and meditation on the mountainside, Patrick would have witnessed again and again the story of death and renewal as it is played out in nature. But however beautiful this story is, the seeming indifference of nature does not fulfill the yearnings of the human spirit. In contrast, but not at all incompatible with this story told in nature, is the lesson Patrick first learned on the mountainside. At the heart of the universe is an infinitely loving and infinitely forgiving presence. Patrick blessed the holy wells and sacred places that the Irish had already found on their own, the thin places where the veil between this world and the next is nearly transparent. Patrick sought not to discredit the native holy people, nor root out their indigenous faith, but to gently introduce a belief in Christ's promise of forgiveness and God's infinite love. Rather than violently uprooting indigenous wisdom and rituals, as the Roman did elsewhere, Patrick planted a new idea in the hope that it would grow and evolve alongside with the truth that was already there. Legend has it he used a three-leaf shamrock in his teachings.
I praise the blessed mystery of God, who is one in three, a single power mystery, Father, Son, and Spirit. I praise the one who blessed the evening star and set the foam upon the white waved sea. I praise the blessed mystery of God, who is one in three, a single power mystery. Brother, sister, spirit.
I need to call Joe back to help me with this next reading, if he's in the next room. I guess he isn't. So I'll do it on my own. The Deer's Cry. Many years ago, Patrick made his way back to Ireland. On Easter Eve, he arrived at the hill of Tara in County Meath, seat of the High King. Easter Eve coincided with the Feast of Tara, a yearly ritual of rebirth and renewal. On the eve of this great feast, all fires were doused, and the land waited in darkness for the king's hearth to be rekindled. In all of Ireland, no flame remained burning, and the people waited in a darkness so deep and complete that it is hard for us to imagine it now. By royal proclamation, no spark could be struck prior to the lighting of the king's own fire, from which all other hearths were renewed. This was the law of the land. This dark night coincided with Easter Eve, when the world waits in a different kind of darkness, the source of all light has died. For one day, we share the pain of this death. For another, we wait in darkness and silent hope as the sun sets and the third day begins. We rekindle the flame of love. This is the Paschal fire and the light of Christ. The High King had not yet kindled the blaze at Tara when the ritual darkness was broken by a small Paschal fire kindled by Patrick on the nearby hill of Salon, just as the sun slipped beneath the horizon. The Paschal fire is the one we light during our Easter vigil. We honor our ancestors and their ancient customs of spring renewal, but like Patrick, we honor the source of all light even more when we light our own small fires. Because he had broken the law of the land, Patrick had to appear before Larry McNeil, the High King. But on their way to the hill of Tara, they chanted a lorica to protect themselves from harm. When the soldiers came to ambush them along the way, instead of finding Patrick and his monks, all they saw was a herd of deer. They put on these words as if they were armor and they were protected. I arise today and put on the strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendor of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me. Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise. Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. The Navajo share a similar prayer about something which they call Hojo. To live in Hojo is to live in complete peace and harmony with all of creation and with the Creator. They say, in beauty I walk, with beauty before me I walk, with beauty behind me I walk, with beauty above me I walk, with beauty all around me I walk, with beauty within me I walk. In beauty all is made whole. In beauty all is restored. Seeking to emulate the 40 days Christ spent alone in the desert and inspired by Patrick's long sojourn on the mountain, Irish monks and holy people went on solitary retreats to fast and pray in the hope of hearing a whisper of the Creator's voice in nature. It's impossible to find an arid landscape comparable to the Judean wilderness in Ireland, except in the imagination. So being Irish, they improvised. They referred to their retreats in the meadows and distant woods of Ireland as a journey to the green desert. As winter recedes and the first green shoots appear, we celebrate St. Patrick at the midpoint of our Lenten journey. Let the wearing of the green today remind us that it's time to make our own journey into the green desert. Even if all we do Even if all we do is roll down the car windows to listen to the peepers, Dae Nu, it is enough. We have made a journey to the green desert. Tune out the persistent voice of the media and focus instead on the returning songbirds and the coyotes. Step outside and gaze up to the great wilderness of the night sky, where the voice of the one who created the universe still echoes. Even if all we do is sit for a time in silence and listen to the soft voice within our own heart space, we have made a green journey.
Birds in the air cast a shadow on the water. Some trees are swaying to the wind's tune. Planets revolve round the sun in perfect order. The earth is dancing to the beat of God's loving heart.
The prayer attributed to Patrick is called a breastplate, a piece of spiritual armor placed over the heart to protect our spirit. It too is a thin place. This prayer is a thin place, a bridge between ancient Druidic tradition and the message of Christ. The Hebrews covered their heads and bound their arms for morning prayer with tefillin. These were leather straps inscribed with sacred text. Patrick, alone on the mountainside without possessions, put on the light of the moon and the rising sun when he awoke to pray. We too can put these words on when we arise to protect our tender hearts and remember that the word is written anew every night by the moon on the sea. I realized one morning as I was putting on these words that they seem to correspond to the energy centers of the human body that are described in Eastern tradition. The light of the sun above our heads, the crown chakra at the top of our head, reflecting this light like the moon. The Celts call poetic inspiration fire in the head, and there we have it, splendor of fire. The speed of lightning corresponds to the throat chakra, where all too often, we speak too quickly and in haste. And swiftness of wind blows through our green heart chakra as the Holy Spirit, which is often depicted as a cleansing wind. The depth of sea evokes the deep emotions stored in our solar plexus, and the stability of earth and the firmness of rock. The lower chakras ground us to earth and to all the stories that are contained within the earth, all of the memories. So I'll close now by wishing you deep peace of the running wave to you, deep peace of the flowing air to you, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars to you, deep peace of the gentle night to you. Moon and stars pour their healing light on you. Deep peace of Christ, the light of the world to you. Deep peace of Christ to you all. Thank you all for joining me, and thank you especially to my good friend Mark Johnson from St. Michael's Episcopal Church. We've been collaborating on creating Celtic Masses within the Episcopal Church and had hoped to do this as a church service, but in the pandemic, we're doing the best we can. I think St. Patrick is the perfect patron saint for the isolation we've all been in the past year. Isolated for 6 years with nobody to talk to but the dogs and the sheep, but still listening and learning to pay heed to his inner voice. This was a man who trusted it when Spirit spoke to him. And Beth, are you still there?
I think she's out of the room there. She got called out.
Oh, okay. I was thinking she should probably stop the recording, but that's okay. She'll stop it when she comes. Oh, and I wanted to unmute everybody. Beth, come and unmute people.
We can unmute ourselves. I wanted to tell you how much I love the story of Patrick's shushing of the dogs on the ship.
That's my favorite too.
Oh, I love the story. It's like Francis of Assisi with the animals. To think of Patrick with the animals is lovely.
Well, the snakes were never part of the story. St. Patrick, we should associate with the deer and with the dogs. Now I really associate Patrick with the dogs, the sheep, and with the deer. That whole thing about the snakes was just an ugly myth. Oh, he drove the snakes. There were never snakes there. It wasn't him driving the Druids out of Ireland. He actually got along fairly well with the holy people there. That's reflected in his prayers and his listening to his own inner wisdom. You know, I don't think he drove the Druids out of Ireland. Somebody made that one up.
Do we have any idea how long he lived, how old he was when he died?
No, I'm afraid I don't. I read most of his Confessio last year. If I'm going to go back to gallery view now that we're not recording. I don't know how old I know he lived to a fairly ripe old age, but I don't know how old he is. I'm sorry.
But he did die in Ireland?
I don't know.
Oh,
Claudia, one of the things I'm thinking about is what a lovely way to put your grandchildren to bed or your children, just by starting at the top and moving all the way down.
It really worked for me. It was just one day. This is something, the Navajo go out in the morning and they offer cornmeal to the sun. And they're in that same place of wanting to create balance in themselves. And when they create balance in themselves, it spreads out into the whole world. So just imagining those energy centers. I'm pretty much a universalist and a nature mystic and a druid, as you all know. And all of these traditions work together for me, thinking of those colors, of those places, and especially the green chakra being where the wind is, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I love the green desert that you mentioned.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that was great. I think the whole thing was lovely, Claudia.
Oh, thank you, Peter.
And Mark's voice was beautiful. It was a beautiful combination.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was lovely. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you so much.
it's nice to celebrate it without the beer.
You know, it really is. Jerry Leonard always told me that in Ireland, it really is more of a holy day. It's not this kind of raucous celebration. It still is a holy day where you're recognizing an important saint. Yeah, I think there's so much, as we evolve, we've talked so much at the Grange lately of an evolving God and evolution in nature and how quantum physics and spirituality work together. And I think as we're evolving, it's back, way back to this older tradition and let all of those earth-centered things come in. There's no reason to not do so. And I think in Patrick, he's like a thin place. He's a bridge between the indigenous and our contemporary Christianity. He's a bridge between indigenous tradition and Christianity, the non-dictatorial, non-hierarchical Christianity. That's just my, oh, and there's my friend Mark coming on. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciated it.
It was my pleasure, Claudia.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Very welcome.
Great voice, Mark.
He's
Thank you.
an amazing choir director. He
And
loves
he is.
to bring out the best. That's what he does. He lets people find their beauty and he brings it out in them. So I'm so glad I've met him and he's my friend now.
It was a great pleasure to be part of this today. So
No, you
thank
have
you.
a beautiful
Thank you
voice.
again, Claudia. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful, Claudia. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Mark.
Wonderful.
Very welcome.
Thank
can
you.
do something
Understand
Thank you, extraordinary.